So, as someone who wants to study veterinary medicine as a career, this idea of developing One Health through the animal microbiome is something that I am really passionate about. A lot of studies that are done on the microbiome, most of them are done on humans, even though animals have a ton to tell us as well. And of course, we should care about animals in general just because of altruism, but that's not the case. But there are a lot of profit incentives as well. So, overall, we should study a lot of different types of animals to learn about their microbiomes. Now, in terms of species diversity, it's not necessarily quite as important as a different delineation. So I split it up into three parts. I believe that pets are generally what people consider animals when you first mention the word. Agricultural animals are second because they are our food source, and then wildlife is last. So generally, people care about wildlife less than the other two, but in terms of actual impact in the world, I would argue that they are the most important. So in terms of study of pets, again, they're the most common, and there are a lot of indicators that are important from pets, namely behavioral indicators. So generally what you'll see is if an owner has stressful tendencies and aggressive tendencies, that will get reflected in the pet. And as a result, there's just different causes of inflammation, and we can see that a lot of the trends of microbes found in dogs reflects human behavior, especially in terms of diet as well. Animals who generally eat a lot of human food tend to start having a little bit less diverse of a microbiome. So we can kind of use that to differentiate between the impacts of humans and dogs in terms of their habits. And then second most important would be agricultural. People generally care about pigs a lot more because of the similar anatomy. There's some hope for transplants in the future, but in terms of the microbiome, we can see that they exhibit the exact same nutritional tendencies that humans do. So there was a study that was done where they give zinc to pigs, and then to a point, when you increase the quantity of zinc intaken, there is an increase in diversity of the microbiome, which is reflexive of a lot of eating prebiotics and probiotics in humans. However, similarly, at a certain point it plateaus and there's no more benefit, and eventually it gets to actual harm, where a lot of the biodiversity actually dies off in the gut, which is again similar to humans, where a lot of the times it seems like we want to in terms of nutrition, we want to eat as much of a good thing as possible, expecting that effect to compound, whereas that's just not the case. However, again, most importantly, I believe wildlife tells us the most about our world. In terms of aquatic trends, a lot of the US's water sources are becoming contaminated, and this is actually reflexive in a lot of carp species. So there are hardy species that can live in really dirty conditions, and as a result, we are able to test on them and look at antibiotic content and see how that arranges their microbiomes. And the answer is it is drastic. So the level of contaminants that we find in our water supply now are so dangerous to these fish that a lot of their microbiomes from the before and after exposing to these antibiotics are not even recognizable. And this has, again, a large amount of implication in terms of our water sources and what we're essentially drinking on a day-to-day basis eventually before purification. Now, similarly, they did another study in Africa in a national refuge where they looked at a combination of animals. So they looked at livestock, agricultural animals, they looked at captive elephants, so kind of pets, and they also looked at wild herbivores. And they found that there's actually a lot of overlap in terms of the trends, but most importantly, human impact in terms of relationship to the other species is becoming less and less as we're becoming more and more urbanized. So again, it seems like these animals are more on the front lines than we are in terms of when there's a negative impact on the world, they deal with it before humans do because we are so far removed, which is once again why we need to study them more intensely. And then finally, there was a study done where birds were tested off of how much human food they were eating, and they did find that there was a merging and similarity in the microbiome. So birds that generally tended to stay near humans, like seagulls and pigeons, ended up having a less diverse gut in the long run because of their proximity to people. So there's a lot to think about in terms of how we should study wildlife and why we should. And once again, the One Health idea is three parts: human health, animal health, and environmental health. And while we're generally going to follow the impacts of humans more so just because we are human and there's also profit incentives there, it's important that we don't forget the other two because they are all meant to be created equal and they're interconnected, as we've seen. Whether it's pets, whether it's agricultural animals, and whether it's wildlife, all of them have implications that are almost directly replicable in each other. So we need to make sure that we are studying all of them intently, and more research funding needs to go into wildlife study specifically because we've seen that a lot of the trends of human health are dealt with at first through wildlife, right? When we think of pollution, we think of sea turtles. When we think of climate change, we think of polar bears. So overall, by studying animals more intensely, we can better understand how exactly the world is being affected. Thank you.